Hi, my name is Macy. I'm an editor here at the PSU Vanguard, and I'm here with Rowan Bean, who I am interviewing today as they are applying for their second term as a senator. They were a senator this last year for ASPSU and running for that same position again.
Yes.
So, to start with, let's talk about some specific issues that you advocate for here at PSU, and what are some actions you've taken during your time as a senator in response to those issues?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that I've been working on this year is working for lowering costs for transit passes. So the current president, Yusuf, and also our campus coordinator, Carol, and I have been meeting with Ian Studi, who is the head of parking and transportation here on campus, to work with transit to just try to get a plan for PSU that's similar to the reduced fare program that transit has already in place. And so we originally wanted to get lower parking, but we realized that's another big issue that is kind of a far reach. So we pivoted and we decided transit. Let's try to push transit and encourage that, because that would encourage more people to take public transportation, therefore reducing the amount of cars that are in the parking garage. So we're still working on that. We have about roughly monthly meetings with Ian Studi, so it's still a process that's beginning, but it's something that we really want to continue out next year.
Awesome. And what exactly would that look like? How is it different than the reduced fare program?
Yeah, so it would be like a percentage-based thing. So it would depend on how much financial aid you would get. And then there are still kinks that we have to work out with it, because this is a problem that, involves a lot of people. And so we have to make sure that we are hitting the right, the right numbers. Let me say that. So what it would look like is that it would be like an equation that how do I explain this? Yusuf is better explaining it than I am, because it was mostly his idea. But it would depend, your parking pass or your transit pass would depend on how much financial aid you would get. So depending on how much financial aid you get, whether you got more financial aid, you would pay just a little bit more in the transit pass, just to make it fair for those who don't get a whole lot of financial aid. Like myself, for example, I don't get any financial aid. And so I have to pay for a lot more things on campus than, say, people who get a lot more financial aid do. So the transit pass would just even out the numbers across the board a little bit. We thought about adding it to tuition, but tuition is already going up, and that is another issue that I served on track for, the Tuition Review Advisory Committee. So we've been working with multiple people and multiple, track, Ian Studi, and transit to work on this issue.
Okay. So just so I understand correctly, students who have less financial aid wouldn't be affected by this, or students who have less financial aid from PSU, they're the ones who would benefit. But students who already have more financial aid, they would not be affected.
No, they would still greatly benefit from it too, because I'm trying to figure out how Yusuf explained it.
Or is it's kind of like a sliding scale?
It's like a sliding scale, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that word. It is like a sliding scale. So it all depends on circumstances and things like that. But the end goal, again, there are kinks that we need to work out with this plan. This may not be the solid plan that we're going forward with, but the idea in whole is to reduce transit costs so we can encourage students to use transit, reducing the parking spaces.
Okay. So is this something that has come into fruition in any way? Has there been any changes made, or is it something that is going to happen in the future, or you're hoping is going to happen in the future?
We're working on it towards the future. This is something that it's not going to happen for next year. The Tuition Review Advisory Committee already sent in their budget reports for next year, but it's something that we're hoping to work on during our office next year in hopes that it will continue the next year after that.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. So let's see. We talked about lowering transportation costs for public transit. What other ideas or issues are you kind of running on going into this next term? What are you hoping to reform or change about PSU?
Yeah, so I think one issue that we've faced a lot this year was communication between students and administration. And what we've been trying to do this year is have those uncomfortable conversations with administration, because in subjects such as, Jason Washington or the Israeli-Palestine conflict, those are issues that we feel that administration doesn't love to have with us students, and so we want to continue building the bridges between students and administration, so that way we can have those conversations, because I believe that those conversations lead to change, the change that the students here want to see.
Okay, perfect. So, let's see. You mentioned conversations about Israel-Palestine and Jason Washington. Can you tell me about what that looked like this past year? Kind of what were you able to accomplish within those specific interests?
Yeah, of course. So a lot of those interests I've been working on with Student Advocacy Committee. That is a committee that I sit on. And actually, Brady has also been doing a lot of the work with us, or I've been doing a lot of work with Brady. Earlier this year, the Student Advocacy Committee, we put on a town hall with UPSOC, and we intended for campus security to be a part of that as well, although an event happened like 10 minutes before the event was supposed to start, and the chief wasn't able to participate. However, we did have members of UPSOC, which is University Public Safety Oversight Committee, sit on a panel, and we had a town hall, so we got to, there was a good amount of people that showed up, and they were able to ask the questions, ask their concerns to UPSOC, in hopes to get, there were pretty decent answers that got back. One thing that we were also focused on is just transparency between campus security and the students as well. I know the chief is working towards having transparency with the students as well, so that's something that we definitely want to hold accountable and make sure that that is for sure happening. A lot of it has to do with the gun use specifically. In effect to Jason Washington, and I think a lot of it is like communication as well. Like a lot of people just didn't know what was going on with campus security and like whether they still have the gun or not, and once we finally got the answer, it's locked up. Most of officers on campus aren't even required to have a gun on them at all, actually. So a lot of the questions that were being asked, there was an answer, there was just no one communicating it prior to those questions being asked. So that's one thing that we want to work towards, is transparency and making sure that answers to questions are being fulfilled.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see. So related to your time spent on the Student Advocacy Committee, this is a quote that you wrote: "With my time spent on the Student Advocacy Committee, I have made numerous connections with other student organizations to work towards bettering our community." So you kind of already mentioned facilitating communication between campus safety and possibly the Israel-Palestine issue. But I guess, what goals besides these were the Student Advocacy Committee able to accomplish this year?
That is a good one. One thing is that we were working towards one thing that we were working on was the Student Bill of Rights, and that's something that Tucker Luft actually wrote, and then Student Advocacy, we took it and we went tabling with it. And so I tabled with Student Advocacy for about a week, and with that I was able to actually get my face out there and talk to different student groups, such as the food pantry. The food pantry is doing well right now, which is amazing, but I got to make connections with that, and that's something that I also hope to make connections with in the future, just working with basic needs in general. A lot of the goals that Student Advocacy had was a lot of more just building bridges between administration and the students here. So we were able to have a conversation with members of Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights, and we had someone from the Board of Trustees office come, and we had a discussion together, and just so each other can be heard. So that's one thing that Student Advocacy is working towards, is making sure that everyone is being heard and everyone's being understood, and that we can make sure that everyone's points are getting across to each other fairly.
Okay. So these are a lot of examples of ways that you've connected students with administration or faculty or different resources on campus to kind of facilitate conversations. Can you point to any particular improvements or changes that have actually been made that you've been able to kind of push towards the administration, if that has actually created a positive effect, or if you support any of those particular ideas for changes to be made besides facilitating communication?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the school year, when the October 7th incident happened, student associations came to Senate, and we heard them and we heard their concerns and things like that. So that happened in October. After that, we moved to we heard the students. All they wanted was just time, and we wanted to give them time. They didn't ask for anything from the student organization, from student government, except for contact with administration. That's what they wanted. And so what Student Advocacy did right after, about a month after that, is we held a unity vigil for anyone who has ever been affected by violence. So that was an event that we hosted. And then throughout the year, we connected the student organizations that came to that Senate meeting with administration by meeting with Super and bringing in that Board of Trustees employee, or from the Office of Board of Trustees. Sorry, my words are getting mixed up. I have a dry mouth right now. The Board of Trustees secretary came in and Super came in, and that's when we had that conversation. So it's been something that we've been working towards all year, and it's been a slow, not necessarily a slow progress, but it is a slow progress because with administration, things drag out, and a lot of time is held in between events and conversations.
Sorry, what was the thing that you said you've been working towards all year? Was it the event, or?
Building the bridges between those student organizations and administration. In January, President Cudd created a task force that kind of centered around the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and so with that, there's four committees within that as well. One of them is working towards having facilitated conversations between people. One of them is working towards violence and protection. And so when we brought those students' concerns up to administration is when President Cudd led to President Cudd's task force.
Okay. So when we're talking about campus safety or student concerns with violence or promoting more nonviolent safety on campus, what are some particular issues that have been brought to light that you would like to address or that you hope to put at the forefront of your, your responsibilities or what you have jurisdiction over this coming year?
Yeah. So I think one thing that needs to be communicated between students and administration and student government is what are our actual abilities when it comes to certain things. So when it comes to like divesting from big corporations, that's not something that student government, it's something we've looked into. It's not something that we can necessarily have full control over. There's issues like disarming PSU, which is something that has been on our mind for sure, but then that's when communication comes into hand, where we aren't a fully disarmed campus. However, officers aren't required to have guns on them at all times. So I think a lot of it comes with communication and just making sure that the questions that the students are asking are being heard and being answered, because I feel prior that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that kind of leads to another point I wanted to bring up. We've heard reports of low activity among senators, students, addressing the idea that ASPSU creates committees but has limited ability to enact change. So can you explain any challenges you face this year in enacting real change around campus? For example, like you mentioned, investment in Boeing isn't something that you have control over, or disarming campus isn't something you have control over. Can you expand on any challenges you've had creating real change, or why you think that there is a discrepancy between your ability to enact change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with my time spent on ASPSU, I've heard of a lot of issues such as reduced tuition, free parking, a lot of things like that, which reducing tuition is, with my time spent on the Tuition Review Advisory Committee, it's not something that even PSU as an administration has control over either. It has to do with what's going on in the world, the money's, even like tax dollars, because it is a state-funded school. So a lot of things that people may be thinking about, we aren't, finishing the promises that we made or anything like that. It's because a lot of the issues that we wanted to work on are a little bit out of our reach, such as reducing tuition and things like that. So we're pivoting and we're working on some issues that are related to them, but maybe just a couple steps down, because that's something that we can actually work on. So when it comes to trying to work with free parking, we realize that parking is also our parking, because school is embedded within the city of Portland. It's not just a school thing, it's also a city thing as well. So we've pivoted and we've worked towards transit. And so a lot of the issues that people think that we're not working towards, we actually are. We're just pivoting from those ideas, and a lot of those things are just in the progress stage right now. And so that's why we're up for re-election, is because we want to finish those projects next year.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, let me just get back to the original page. Okay, so this is also based on something you wrote. This is a quote. I have made numerous connections with other student organizations to work towards bettering our community. You mentioned PSU Super. Which student groups, organizations did you connect with over this last term, and what efforts have you participated in to engage with and support student groups and organizations?
Yeah, so while I was tabling for Student Advocacy Committee, I met a lot of people just through passing, them going through classes. So like I said before, I met with one of the managers of the food pantry, and so we got to talking, and we were talking about how the basic needs hub in general just needs more funding, and that's the case for a lot of schools statewide. And so I went to University Lobby Day, and I advocated for the basic needs resolution, which would give a lot of money towards schools for their basic needs hub. Sorry. And so unfortunately, that bill did not get passed. But it is legislation and policy like that I want to work towards. It's something that I want to do as a career as well. So when it comes, a lot of the connections that I made through the food pantry and through basic needs, the basic needs hub, I feel that although the funding didn't pull through next year, there's still ways for funding that we can work towards next year. One thing that fits within the Basic Needs Hub is that right now I'm working with another Senator, Michael, on the out-of-state student resolution as well. So that will also hopefully bring more resources or open resources to out-of-state students as well. And so that would connect to different resources on campus. So such as like the Financial Wellness Center and things like that. We want to connect with them and different student organizations to open their resources to fit out-of-state students.
Mm-hmm. So can you expand on a little bit what that would look like, or what you're doing as an advocate for out-of-state students to, I guess, connect them to more resources or expand the resources that are available to them?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that we're really interested in working on is looking into like the Northwest Housing Project and how they give out housing vouchers. And so one thing that we want to work on is possibly, if this is a possible, first we're starting with a committee. We have this committee, we're meeting every week. Secondly, we're figuring out what we want for sure, and what we want is housing vouchers. We want resources extended to out-of-state students specifically, like out-of-state student-specific orientation. Because I'm an out-of-state student myself, there was a lot of things that coming into Portland I just wasn't aware of, because I felt that Portland State was fitted more towards commuter students or students that are from Portland specifically. And so another thing that what we originally thought was, reducing tuition, but that's an issue that I don't think is ever going to be reached or controlled from students. So our next step was to just make sure that out-of-state students are being supported, that they're, that they know what they're coming to Portland State, and that, when it comes to housing, specifically housing is a citywide issue, and it's an issue within Portland State as well. And so I know that they cut the funding for the houseless center that was here for campus for students specifically. And so one thing that I think would be great is fundraising to make sure that is up and running again, or a program similar to that, because housing is such a big issue when it comes to out-of-state students as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Perfect. Okay. So let's talk about diversity on campus. So, what did you accomplish during this last term to support or uplift marginalized students on campus? And do you have any plans going into this next year to foster diversity on campus?
Yeah. So I think what comes to mind first is the Israeli-Palestine conflict, because I feel like that was a big issue that has been on our minds all year. And what we did is advocacy specifically, we made sure that we held the unity vigil, for example, and so that way people could come and speak and just talk about, wasn't necessarily for Israeli-Palestine specific, but it was a response to that in a sense, where we opened up the unity vigil for anyone who's ever been affected by violence, whether that's, losing someone to COVID or gun violence or anything like that. We wanted to make sure we held a safe space for those who felt affected by it. And so we wanted like speakers to come. Unfortunately, no one attended the event, but it was something that we still worked towards to create that safe space for people to feel heard, because I feel like that's one of the biggest concerns that students have on campus, is that they just don't feel like they're being heard. And so we want to make sure that their voice is uplifted and that their voice is heard. And so another thing with that is with the Unity Vigil, we've also connected, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. What did you accomplish during your term to support or uplift marginalized students on campus, and what are your plans going into the next year to foster diversity on campus?
Yes, okay. So yeah, the Unity Vigil, and then I think a lot of the work that relates to that is just the work that student advocacy has been doing in general. And moving forward, we intend to meet with more students. Another thing that has happened within the last year is that we passed a resolution so that every senator is a liaison for different student groups. So that way, different student groups will also have their voices involved with student government as well. So that reaches out to every single corner of the school and multiple cultural centers as well. So we want to make sure that their voices are heard and that their voices are coming into student government.
Awesome. And what student group are you a liaison for?
So I'm part of the specific, so there's different categories of student groups. And so I'm a liaison for the pre-professional groups and a couple of the advocacy groups. The advocacy groups are split up between a few of us, so we each liaison to them. But then like the pre-professional groups, like pre-law, pre-med, things like that.
Okay. And so what are some ways that you've interacted with those groups that you represent, or ways that you hope to, I don't know, offer them resources or connections or whatever it may be that they are benefiting from with this liaison relationship?
Yeah, so because the resolution is fairly new, it just passed within the last few months, the kinks of it is still being worked out as well. And so that coming into next year, we want to have regular meetings with them, attend at least one event for every group that you're a liaison for monthly, attend their meetings monthly, just make sure that you're connecting with them. So that's one thing that we hope to do in the future, that I hope to do in next year.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So the liaison kind of program is something that is in the Student Advocacy Committee within ASPSU.
It was something that was voted on by the Senate,
Okay.
by the student government as a whole, and then the groups were assigned within our different committees. So within advocacy and student life is when the senators chose which liaisons they wanted to be.
Okay, so can you kind of explain the difference between the roles between Student Advocacy Committee and the senator role in general? If senators are already advocating for students, what's kind of the difference?
Yeah. So the Student Advocacy Committee, it's more centered. So Senate as a whole, we hear everyone. But the Senate as a whole, because we're such a large group, it's hard for all of us to just take action. So that's why we have a Student Advocacy Committee. It is a smaller group, more focused on putting the action down on things. The Senate as a whole votes. So the Senate as a whole has like final say when it comes to resolutions being passed, resolutions that could be written within student advocacy or proposed through student advocacy. The committee itself also is the one that will maybe have like one-on-one meetings with students or with other student groups or things like that. So the Senate as a whole has the final vote and the final say on things. Advocacy itself takes more of the action.
Okay. Do you have any examples of action that advocacy group specifically has taken over this last year?
Yeah, so with the Unity Vigil, for example, is something that the Senate as a whole is when we heard those students' concerns is during a Senate meeting, and then Student Advocacy Committee specifically is the ones that put on the Unity Vigil.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, and let's see. So I guess this last question is kind of about your personal ideologies or your experience as a student. So you could talk about how you envision you and your identity fitting into your goals as a senator this upcoming term. It can be related to kind of social movements you're passionate about. It could be related to your major and how you see that fitting into your role as a senator.
Yeah, very. So my major is sex, gender, and queer studies, and I'm hoping to get a minor in law and legal studies. So in the long run, I want to be a human rights advocate and human rights lawyer. So that kind of fits into my work that I'm doing with Student Advocacy and Senate. It's advocating for people who feel like their voices are not being heard. That's what I want to do as a career, and that's what I want to do here at PSU. I want to make sure that people are getting the answers that they need. When I came into student government, there was a lot of questions that I had, and then I found out the answers, and I was like, oh my gosh, why doesn't everyone know about this? So that's something that I just want to be like a megaphone and make sure that people on administration side are being heard from students, and that on the student side, they're hearing what administration has to say. I feel like there is a barrier between the two, and it needs to get knocked down. Because I see from both sides in student government. I see the administration side and I see the student side, and it's like watching your friends like talk about each other and they just need to talk to each other, like talk bad about each other and they just need to talk to each other. It's like that in a way, where there just needs to be a communication barrier brought down between the two.
Yeah, for sure. That is something that students bring up a lot. That there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy that kind of limits the ways that students can interact with people who actually have the power to make change. So I guess my question is, in what ways do you feel like you've torn down that barrier between students and administration? Is there any way that you feel like you have certain goals or maybe things you've already accomplished to streamline that communication between students and administration?
Yeah, so I feel like over this last year, students just haven't felt safe on campus. And so when we met with the Secretary of the Board of Trustees and with Super, we were able to have that conversation of, okay, why are students feeling unsafe and what can administration do about that? A lot of it has to do with, just acknowledging certain things that have happened in the world. That is something that I feel like is a worldwide issue, is just not acknowledging reality. And so one thing that I feel strongly about is just creating a safe space for students. I identify as bisexual, so as a queer student, in my hometown specifically, like it was a very conservative area, so queer students never felt safe. And so that's something that I want to make sure is extended to everyone of every identity here at PSU, is to make sure that students are feeling safe, because this is our school, this is our education, we're paying for this education. I want to make sure that people are feeling safe coming to school to get the education that they deserve.
Yeah, for sure. That is a common complaint as someone who interviews a lot of students, that they feel unsafe because of their whatever identity it may be on campus as a marginalized student. So do you have any kind of tangible ideas or plans to create that safe space that you're talking about?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we are embedded within downtown Portland. That is something that I think plays a huge effect into students' safety here on campus. I know that a lot of it also has to do with just lack of resources as well, and lack of funding. And so if I want to find out whether we can get more funding towards campus security, for example, maybe get more training instilled within so within campus security, there's different ranks of officers. Maybe get more training involved in the lower ranking officers, so that way the escorts, for example, can be carrying a whistle or pepper spray or something like that that just makes students feel a little bit more safer. It's installing more training, installing more funding somehow. I want to find out whether that is possible, and if it is, go through with it.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, those are most of my questions. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you want to add, or something that we touched on but you want to talk about more in depth, anything like that?
I think I just want to echo that we have been working towards the concerns that students have. Either we've pivoted but are on the same end goal, but maybe pivoted ideas, but we are working towards the issues that students have on campus, and we really want to continue that next year.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to interview. It was great speaking with you, and that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.